If you're struggling with just looking like an oily mess, I find that the finish is a little bit blotchy. Buffing and the swirling just causes irritation to my skin. Hi, you guys. Welcome back to my channel. If you're new here, my name is Jessica. I'm in the spirit of makeup, feeling very creative, very fun. I just finished filming this eyeshadow look. How gorgeous. So if you're curious about any details, it will be linked. I started doing makeup at a very young age. I probably should not have been doing it at that age, but I was practicing without permission. I would go into my mom's bathroom, go through her makeup bag, and just pick a few things to mess around with. And I basically looked a hot mess for a few years, but I feel like I've finally gotten down to knowing what routines work for me, what products I like, the formulas that I gravitate towards. So I thought that I would share maybe some of my more unpopular opinions about makeup that I have experiences with over the years. As a makeup enthusiast, makeup is really personal to you. So, what works for you may not work for the next person based on the type of skin you have. The texture that you have, maybe some issues you may be having with your skin. All those factors can affect the appearance of your makeup. So, that kind of leads me into my first topic, which is that expensive products don't always give you the best results. And I know that's a hard truth for a lot of us. So, there are a lot more things that go into play with how your makeup will appear. I found that over time, my makeup has looked better because of my technique, not necessarily the products that I was using. Even if you have the best product on the market, if you don't know how to use it properly, if you haven't mastered that technique, the application, then your look may not be as well as somebody who knows how to do all of that. So I think it's really important to learn technique over trying to find the most expensive product because it may not always give you the best results. And coming from somebody who incorporates drugstore products into her higher brand makeup products, I found that a combination of the two and my technique genuinely brings me the best results. I'm also an oily girl, so this kind of leads me to my next opinion, which is that overly mattifying products sort of makes me produce more oil and makes me appear oilier. I think I've just noticed that the more I fight my oily side, the more it comes out. The combination of a super drying powder paired with a mattifying setting powder isn't really the best combination for oily skin. Sort of makes your skin even drier. Therefore, it produces oils on its own naturally. I'm not sure what the science is behind that, but I could probably figure it out for you guys. I've just noticed that the more I lean into dewier, more hydrating products, my makeup appears so much more natural and it lasts a lot longer without needing touch ups, without needing blotting or touching up with powder. If you're struggling with just looking like an oily mess after a few hours, within your 8 to 12-hour day, you should definitely try hydrating more dewy products. All right, so since I just did this eyeshadow, I thought that I would touch on the topic of whether you need eyeshadow primer or not to achieve a more vibrant, long lasting look. So, from my opinion, I've found that you don't really need an eyeshadow primer more as a base that you can build color, pigment, whatever you want to use off of. So when I did this look, I actually used a combination of an eyeshadow primer and my concealer for a better shade match. And then I put a little bit of my foundation mixing pigment. I do have experience mixing my foundation colors. That's just something that I've learned to do as a dark skinned girl in the makeup industry, having to adjust tones of products to match my skin tone. That's something that not everybody has access to or is willing to do. So honestly, I found that you don't really need an extra product in your makeup bag. An eyeshadow primer does help the longevity of your makeup, and I really do think that in my state, it helps with like my eyeshadow creasing. So that is definitely a pro, but I found that it's not really necessary to do. This opinion is for your base routine when you're doing your foundation and all of that. And I kind of touched on this topic in one of my previous videos, but I think that no foundation makeup is really cute. So the argument is that we can tell when you're not wearing foundation because there's no makeup on your forehead. And I kind of went over that in my video about what I would do in that situation. For certain seasons, I change my makeup routine naturally. As a sweaty, oily girl, I like to avoid foundation during the hotter months because I found that my makeup doesn't last as long if I include that step. If you take care of your skin and you get the right concealer match, you can definitely get a unclockable look with no foundation, and it's actually one of my favorite ways to do my makeup. If you're curious about how I do my base routine, you can check out my video. I'll have it linked somewhere for you guys, but there is no foundation in that routine, so beware. Staying on the topic of base routines, foundation routines, for my base, I found that I prefer to use sponges and powder puffs over brushes. Just for my wet products on my base, I prefer the blendability that a sponge or a powder puff offers, which is very different than what, your brush would typically do. So, like, the argument here is that, the beauty blender soaks up a lot of your product and it doesn't allow it to be as pigmented as it could be if you were using a brush, which I find is kind of true. I think that's one of the aspects that I appreciate about a sponge or a powder puff is that it kind of has like a natural blending feature on its own, so you don't have to do as much blending as you would with the brush. And I found that over time, the buffing and the swirling just causes irritation to my skin. I have very sensitive skin, so I just don't like the finish of my face after I use a brush versus when I use a sponge. I think it's just more seamless with the blend. So that may be a little controversial for you girlies, but I know that with my sensitive skin, I have to use powder puffs and sponges for my base. I also think that when I use a sponge for my under eyes, for my concealer, I get a more even application. Now, mind you, it is all about technique. It's not about the tools you use. It's also about the technique that you use them with. So, for example, with powder puffs, I make sure that when I'm setting my under eye, I'm tapping off the excess on my arm. I don't want anything that will cause a cakey appearance, so that's just how I layer on my powder, which leads me to my next topic, which is how you set your makeup can either make or break your entire look. You have your wet layer for your makeup and then you have your dry layer to set it and forget it for the day. But I found that if you use too much powder, you start to enter ashy, ghosty flashback territory. And that is not the look that we're going for unless it is. So I started leaning away from baking my under eyes with excess powder, keeping it on for like 10-15 minutes, and I started leaning more towards applying my powders in layers and not really baking, but actually incorporating and setting that powder into my skin. And it has changed the appearance of my makeup. But if you use too little powder, I find that the finish is a little bit blotchy. So there's like a middle ground between the powders that you have to get familiar with to know what looks good on camera, off camera, in daily life. I've definitely been fortunate enough to keep playing around with my makeup, getting better. That's definitely something that I've noticed though, is that honestly, how you set your makeup, even reverse contouring of the nose, it makes or breaks your entire look. The last unpopular opinion I have about makeup is that makeup is really just supposed to be fun. It is not that serious ever. So if you feel like wearing a green cut crease to the grocery store, you should be allowed to do that. Nobody can judge you. That is who you want to be. Have fun, be creative, spread love and joy. So that is one of the things I love the most about makeup is how creative everyone gets to be, and you get to share your looks with people and engage in a community that understands beauty and has so much fun creating different looks. Sometimes we get caught up in trends or feeling like we have to stick with what's hot for the times, but honestly, makeup is what you make it, and beauty really is in the eye of the beholder. So make sure that you're doing what you love. And if what you love is, again, a green cut crease at the grocery store, you do you. I love that for you. As a makeup enthusiast, I grew up learning how to do my makeup through YouTube University since I was a child, and through just playing around and teaching myself how to do makeup in the comfort of my room. So I grew up watching Patricia Bright, Jackie Aina, and now some of my favorite creators are Uche, Makeup by Chelsea, Makeup by Esther just came out with a new blush set with MAC, which is the OG. MAC is where I also started doing makeup, so I just love makeup techniques and the different products that these new creators and the creators I grew up watching have shown us how to do countless times. So I've just become a makeup lover, and I'm so happy that I'm kind of entering this season again where I want to explore different looks and I want to get creative and kind of go outside my comfort zone. So this has been really fun, and I hope that you guys enjoyed this. Again, if you guys are curious about how I achieved this look, I will have it linked for you guys in the description. Let me know if you guys share some of the opinions that I have on makeup, or maybe you can offer me a different perspective. I would love to hear from you. Thank you guys so much for watching. I will catch you in the next video. Bye!